All right, so I want to start reviewing this. Bear in mind that I want you to be able to label, I want you to be able to identify your camera parts and not simply just regurgitate what's up here. It's why I haven't sent it yet, actually. I want you to be able to like point at your camera and be like, that's the mode dial. But that being said, we all have to start somewhere. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so we're missing a couple people. Hopefully you guys have new files to work on from our assignment I gave last week. That's what we'll be doing in class after our first tutorial, this tutorial before. I'm going to require for you to have a certain amount of things done before the end of class, and then you're going to finish retouching the pictures that you have to post by the end of the week for this project, okay? All right. So let's begin. I just want to review that it takes these 3 parts to make a good exposure, right? It's called the exposure triangle. And that involves shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, all right? So what is ISO? How is it measured? What does it control? Be more specific for me. Anyone else want to help her out?
Doesn't it help the,
No, good guess though.
That's aperture.
Yes, it is aperture. Reassuring to know you know what the actual thing is. Okay, so it's, yes, one more shot.
How much light does it use?
Sensitivity, correct. Yes, it is light sensitivity, which is the word I was trying to get you to go on. It has to do with how sensitive your film or your sensor is to light. What does it control? How about this? What is the trade-off with ISO? How does it work? Yes?
Noise.
Noise, right. Higher ISO, more light sensitivity, higher grain, right? And that's what this picture was demonstrating when I showed you this, okay? What do I want you to start at? 400, yes. 100 is the lowest. It's sometimes hard to get enough light for 400. 400 is a really good place to start. All right. Next is aperture. You started that. And can you tell us what aperture measures?
How big your lens is open.
Correct. Yeah, the diameter in which the lens is open, right? How is it measured?
F-stop.
F-stops, correct. What's the important thing to remember about f-stops? They are fractions, correct. All right, so remember all of that. And a little tidbit of information here that I don't want you to forget. If you change the f-stop, how much is that changing your light? Let's say we're making the f-stop larger by 1 stop. By double. Okay, so when you open it up wider, it doubles the amount of light, and when you close it up by 1 stop, it's halving the amount of light available. Okay? These are the numbers that are mostly available. I've told you before, it goes pretty much between 2.8 and between 16 or 32. But lenses do have the ability to go down to 1.0 or 1.4. They're also wicked expensive. And they can also go up to f64, okay, which means it's little itty bitty bitty, okay, which we went over when we talked about Ansel Adams and things, right? All that stuff that's in focus. So since I just gave you the answer, what does aperture control? Besides how much light's coming in, how does it control the visual aesthetic of your picture? Yes? Be more specific. Try it.
Like what's in focus?
How much is in focus? Yeah, you were on the right path. All right, so we're talking about, and what is that measurement called?
Depth of field.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so depth of field. How much of our picture is in focus, okay? If you have a very wide opening, aka a small number, we'll pick 2.8, what does that mean your depth of field will be? Shallow, correct. It means that your focus, the plane which is in focus is very narrow, whereas as you have a larger aperture, we'll pick 16, then you have more in focus, right? My analogy was squinting to see, okay? Again, I will have you take this test with your camera. However, I do want you to be able to recognize the numbers that are present here. Some cameras have the ability to do half stops, which is also why I want you to be able to recognize these. I've seen a camera be able to do like 6.2 or something like that because it's a fancier one. It's like this weird in-between stop. So I want you to I want to make sure you guys know what is the generic stops, where you're supposed to always be stopping. Okay. All right, so the depth of field, this is what this was showing, right? The background's out of focus. All right, and lastly is, we got 2 of the 3 done, right? Aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. Great. And what does that control?
How long the lens is open?
Yeah, how long the lens is open, which can control sharpness depending on how much movement's in the picture, right? And what did I say is the slowest you should go without putting something on a tripod because of human shake?
1/2.
125, close. 250 pretty much means you'll be very sharp if you're hand holding. 125 is the safest place and the lowest I would start. I have shot things at 1/60 before, but I'm holding my breath and they're not like crystal clear and sharp like you would like. Okay. All right. Camera parts, hooray. Can you tell me what part number 1 is? The shutter button, yes ma'am, all right. Pushing it halfway down lets you focus if you're using automatic focus, otherwise you will fully release the shutter. What's number 3?
Mirror.
The lens, yes, all right. The mirror's number, good guess, it's inside of there. Yes, it's the lens mount, all right. That's where you can put the lens onto your camera if you're interchanging it. And if you're changing your lens release button. It's pretty much always on that side of your camera. Nice, easy thing for your thumb to press. Alrighty. And here, this is the mirror, correct. It flips up when it's taking a picture, so that way the sensor can be sensitized to the light. And it's how you see your picture in the viewfinder when you're framing. Built-in flash, yes ma'am. All right. Most of them have a button to open that. Otherwise, you would have to put it in your manual settings in your camera. Yes, sir.
Do we have to say built-in flash?
No. Flash is flash. It is the built-in flash, but it's the same thing. I'll understand what you're saying. All right, so now we're looking in the viewfinder and we see these points. What is number 2? It is, right? And it's being measured as a non-fraction, right? So technically this should be written as 1/250 if you were to be writing it out for me, right? A 250th of a second, if you will, right? Please remember that shutter speed is measured in fractions of a second until you get to 1/3 of a second. Then it starts measuring in full numbers. Number 3. Yes. The aperture value, right, which has to do with how wide it's open. We just went over that. And what's number 4 here?
ISO.
Yes. The ISO. Remember, it's measured in what's called speed. So if someone says, what's the speed of your camera? They're talking to you about your ISO, not your shutter speed. Okay? And lastly,
Is that the metering?
it is the light meter. Yes. Again, I really want you to be familiar with using this in scene whenever possible. It takes way more time to learn, and then it will take way less time to shoot when you're better at it. So just take the time to start getting used to reading that. Remember, you want it to be in the center, lining up. If you find it over here where it's negatives, unless you have a Nikon film, it'll be opposite. But if you find it in the negatives, that means it's underexposed. If you find it positive, that means it's underexposed. Also remember how I went over the fact that this is measuring for what's called a 50% gray, which means that it's not measuring for white or black. It's measuring to like what the camera considers best exposed. So depending on what your scene is, I went over beach, I went over snow, I went over bridal dresses, right? You might have to remember that and adjust accordingly and not necessarily strictly follow that light meter because it's going to meter incorrectly, right? If you're metering white sand, if you're metering your white dress, it's going to tell you it's overexposed because it's white. So bear that in mind while you're shooting and you're reading your meter, that if you're shooting something very bright, you probably should be a little bit more on the +1 side, okay? All right, back of the camera. What is this called? 1 and 2. Viewfinder, yes, so the viewfinder eyepiece, correct. Viewfinder is correct. That's how you frame your image. What's number 3?
Screen.
Yes, the LCD screen, easy enough. But again, I want you to be able to use the proper terms when you're talking about your camera parts, particularly because half of this is online. I want you to be able to email me and be like, okay, this is happening with this button, and when I change this setting and this setting, nothing's changing. And I can help you right away without being like, well, what part of the camera are you talking about? Can you take a picture with your cell phone and send it to me, right? All right, the LCD monitor, great job. What is this called? This assortment, collection of buttons. It's called set buttons. Or the multi-controller, because you have multiple in your assortment of set buttons, all right? Generally speaking, you have the set in the center, which will set your settings. Then you have your 4 options on the side to toggle through. Some of them have a ring that you have to like kind of direct to one side or the other side. Some of them have buttons. All right, number 14 is pointing to this. What is that called? Yes, and it's also called something else. So when you're not recording video and you're using it for photos, what's it called? Live view. All right, so live view will play back for you on your LCD screen what the viewfinder is looking at, right? It's a way for you to see what you're framing without looking through the viewfinder. Remember, I mentioned this could be really helpful if you're trying to frame something and you're not trying to do it at eye level. You can still see what you're framing without having your head to the back of the camera, okay? Or also your switch for video recording, like she said, that's totally correct. All right. Specifically looking at the LCD here, what's number 1? Shooting mode, correct. What would I like to see it set to? Yes, M, thank you. What's number 2? Yes, it is. Shutter speed. Great job, guys. Number 4. Yes, the image is remaining. Right, photo count, that's good too. I would accept either of those. What's number 5?
Oh, the type of photo.
Yes, image quality and image type, right? So we're looking for the format that things are being saved as. What would I like for you to save it as? Yes, and do we know what this means? Do we go over this? This means RAW plus JPEG. That's what that weird symbol, and for some reason L means, is JPEG. It's pretty universal. We are looking for RAW. I went over before, if you have a Canon, it might not be written as RAW, it might be written as CR2. If you're using a Nikon, it might be written as NEF or something else, right? And then, you know, Fuji and stuff has their own like file types. Okay, number 7. Images, oh, I went the wrong thing here. Sorry about this like miss thing in here, guys. Number 7, aperture. Sorry about that improper close-up. All right. What is number 1? It's found here. Your focus mode switch, right? To switch between autofocus and manual focus. Number 4. Important piece of the camera here. Close. Hot shoe, yes. It's essentially, the hot shoe is for you to attach anything else to your camera that's not going to be plugged into it with a cord. When I say plugged into it with a cord, whether you're connecting it to your computer, if you're wirelessly connecting it to a shutter release, right? If you're wireless, if you're wirely connecting it to strobes, you would use cords for that. The hot shoe is how you would connect an external flash, wireless strobes, wireless shutter releases, right? Things like that will go on the hot shoe. Number 7, which also is not labeling the right thing, is it? It's number 6. All right. It is the mode dial, so kind of close. Again, sorry for mislabeling this, guys. I thought I read this properly. It is the mode dial. This dial is really important. All right, and it's going to be set to this all the time, for at least the rest of the semester. Okay, it's going to be set to M over here. All right, now I'm looking at the larger portion of your lens here. What is this? Yes, correct. It is the zoom ring, right? To zoom in and out of your picture, changing your focal length, focal depth, excuse me. And then number 10 here, yes, is the focus ring. All right, and that has to do with adjusting the focus, particularly when it's in manual. Are there any questions? Okay, moving right